All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Lisa and I have a lot of information to get through in a very short amount of time. We're going to be speed talking today, so we're going to go ahead and make sure we start right on time. If you are just joining the Zoom, please, as you can see on the cover slide there, if you wouldn't mind, please introducing yourself in the chat box. So who you are, who you work for, what you do, that would be great. Lisa and I need that for our project. For our reporting purposes, we need to know who we spoke to. So if you could introduce yourself in the chat box, that would be awesome. Lisa, I can see your audio on the screen. So if we can go ahead and advance the slide, that'd be awesome. So Lisa and I are going to talk about a new product that we have. This is a relatively new training from Project 10. Many of you know that we have lots of trainings that focus around secondary transition planning, and we do a lot of talking about high school level. So we developed a transition planning training for middle school level. So we're going to talk through kind of the resources that are related to secondary transition, especially as it pertains to middle school transition planning. We're going to talk about some of the components of the IEP and their prevalence at middle school and ways to kind of really help that transition from middle school to high school. We're going to look at activities and strategies that are going to help support students as they enter and exit, or enter and attend and move from middle school to high school. And then how we really look at middle school is really the launching point for secondary transition. You can never start transition planning early enough. For many students, it starts in middle school, but if you can even start earlier than middle school, that's ideal. But for many, it starts in middle school. So it's kind of the launching pad for preparing students to move forward. Go ahead, Lisa. So here are some resources that are available that accompany the training. Many of you are familiar with our secondary transition roadmap for families. That was an extremely popular product when it came out that really kind of helped families navigate that transition planning process for our students 14 and up. So what we did was, instead of having a roadmap, since our middle school students don't drive, hopefully they're not old enough to drive, but we developed what we call the trail map. So we have the middle school transition trail map for families. We have resources and references for middle school transition trail map for families. And then we have the benchmarks for middle school transition planning. Those are also available in Spanish. So if you need those, we have those on our publications page, which you have the website for right there. So we, again, Project 10, we do training on all things transition, but again, this is one of our newer products developed for transition planning. Go ahead, Lisa. So when we talk about the transition from elementary to middle school, you know, that shift is really critical. You got your elementary school students, they're used to having one teacher all day long. I know it was a big deal when my kids went from having one teacher to having two teachers all day long. So, you know, making that switch from only having one or two teachers to then going to high school, and now they're switching classes, you know, maybe like 6 times. So that's, you know, it's a really critical time for our students when they're transitioning from elementary to middle, because now they've got to navigate a much larger campus, and again, have to navigate, you know, 5 or 6 or 7 teachers now instead of just 1 or 2. It would be great, obviously, if we have representatives from the middle school who come down to the elementary school and attend that student's final IEP meeting in elementary school to help prepare them for that shift to middle school. And again, hoping that students and families, you know, we want them to have that successful transition to middle school. So we're going to share with you some things that are just some good, helpful hints and tips to help that ease that transition. So here are some activities that students and families can do to support that transition. So again, you know, of course, we want our families to attend all IEP meetings, and we know that they do really well attending IEP meetings when their student is younger. And as we move up to middle and high school, sometimes we start to see parent participation kind of dwindle a little bit. But it's really critical, really important to attend that final IEP meeting in 5th grade. You know, make a point to plan to attend. If the middle school is having a 6th grade transition night, make that preparation an effort to attend that transition night, or maybe just schedule a separate visit to kind of tour the middle school and see the programs. Be familiar with your middle school or junior high school's website so you can kind of see what sorts of clubs they have, what sorts of supports they offer. Usually ways for you to get a lot of information from the school is from their website. Again, attending those IEP meetings, making sure you attend that IEP meeting in 6th grade, because because again, that's a big shift and a big transition from having just 1 or 2 teachers to now having to navigate maybe 6 different teachers. And then if you're having any questions or concerns, make sure that you do address that with your middle school. Make sure that you have a liaison at the middle school, somebody that you can go talk to. Might be your ESE case manager, it might be an assistant principal, it might be a school counselor, but just make sure that, helping families establish that person that is going to be their contact person. So as you know, with high school, it's easy to think about, when they've met all of the requirements. They have a certain number of credits they have a certain GPA they have to obtain. But when it comes to middle school, they're not necessarily tagged to a GPA. We don't usually calculate a GPA in middle school, and we don't necessarily accumulate in total credits like we do in high school, but they do have requirements they have to meet. So they've got to have at least 3 English language arts classes. They have to have at least 3 classes of math, 3 science courses, and then 3 social studies courses. And one of those social studies courses has to be civics, which we know has that end of course exam that the student must take. And then knowing that the IEP team can consider waiving the civics EOC if it's going to negatively impact that student's overall course grade. And again, if you reference our trail map, we put these little trail markers in here. So if you have a copy of the trail map, or you go to our website now and pull it up, you can kind of follow along with where in the trail map these things are mentioned. Other requirements for middle school, they have to have PE every single year for at least one of the semesters. They have to have PE. And then they have to have that career and educational planning component that is required for middle school. It is now a promotional requirement for middle to high school. This was some new legislation a couple years ago that they had to have this career and educational planning. They can do it in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, but they had to do it at some point, and it's promotional requirement to high school. So don't you know, I had an 8th grader when this legislation came out. He was an 8th grader. And so, part of me as a parent panicked because I wanted to make sure he was going to promote to 9th grade, because they said this is a promotional requirement. They have to have this. And so I knew he didn't have a class on his schedule that was about career and educational planning, because it can be a standalone course, or it can be incorporated into one of their other classes, like social studies, for example. So me working for Project 10 and as a DOE project, I'm my kid's school's worst nightmare. So I, of course, call up my son's school counselor and I say, hey, Jake's an 8th grader. He has to have this career and educational plan thing to promote to high school next year. How's he getting it? Crickets for like 2 weeks. Nobody answered me. And then finally somebody came back to me and said, oh, we're doing that through social studies. And I said, okay, that's all I wanted to know was how is he getting it? Now, of course, I'm also the parent that pretty regularly said, hey, Jake, so in social studies, are you doing something related to career and educational planning? And he'd look at me like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. So I'm not really sure how and when he got it, but they said he got it. He promoted to 9th grade, all is well. So again, just making sure that this is a new legislative, I say new, he's a 9th grader now. So 2 years ago, this was a new legislative requirement for that career and educational plan that they have to have in middle school at some point. Again, can be a standalone course, or it can be incorporated into one of their existing classes. Go ahead, Lisa. So when we're thinking about our middle school students who are transitioning to high school, there's lots of things to consider. A lot of our high school programs have career academies or might be magnet programs. And so if our middle school students are interested in one of those career academies or in a magnet program, there's typically an application process for that. And that application process and deadline could be, in January of the year that they're still in middle school. So we have to make sure that our families are aware that these academies and programs are out there. And if their student is interested in applying for one of those, they've got to be able to kind of keep track of when those deadlines are, because typically, obviously, they're still going to be in 8th grade trying to apply for that 9th grade program. Many of them are competitive. They have eligibility requirements. So sometimes there might be an audition, especially if it's like a school of the arts. There's probably going to be an audition, or there may be a portfolio that they have to submit. So making sure that they kind of keep up with those requirements. And then knowing if that's the path that student wants to take, that should be incorporated and considered when doing that career and educational plan and their planning for high school. These is just some tips for families from the National Center on Secondary Education and Transition. So just great tips. I'm sure there's nothing on this list that isn't going to like blow your mind, you know, limit the amount of time they watch TV and play video games. I know that's like a forever challenge of every family, especially my own. Know who your kids' friends are, know their family members as well. Talk to them about, you know, school, what's going well, what didn't go well today, you know, not just questions where they can say yes or no, but ask them questions about school and about their day to which they're going to have to, you know, actually talk to you and not just say uh-huh or or something like that. Go ahead, Lisa. Again, we are going to look at, well, we're not going to go as in depth into the pieces of the IEP that oftentimes we start writing in middle school, but if you go to our trail map, trail marker 4 is where it kind of talks about the IEP. So the screenshot you see here, the transition services checklist. This is a document that comes out of our family guide. It's a really great document that can also help educators kind of understand what's required at the different age levels for IEP writing. So what do I need to do at 14? What do I need to do, or what should I be doing for transition planning at 15, 16, and so on? And so many of our middle school students are 14 in middle school. So a lot of the things that are required at 14 are happening in middle school. So just a great checklist to kind of, you know, make sure that in your mind, you kind of making sure that you're covering all your bases of what sorts of transition planning elements need to be completed at those different timeframes. The accommodations manual is available on the DOE website. I'm pretty sure that most of us know the difference between accommodations and modifications, but we'll show you the list anyway. You can go ahead, Lisa, and you can access that manual on DOE's site with that link. But we all know that accommodations change the way students learn and how they're tested, but our modifications change what they're expected to learn. So again, just kind of seeing the difference between accommodations and modifications again, just to keep that fresh in our brain. Some additional resources that talk about accommodations and modifications, you can see there on the website. Again, some resources that come from DOE, some resources that have come from Fiddlers, resources that have come from our Florida Alliance for Assistive Technology, which we call FAST, and then our Technology Learning Connection MTSS group.
I think it's me.
I think it's you.
And I apologize for the different pop-ups. I normally use my cell phone. It was making clicky noises, which I couldn't hear. Hopefully you can all hear okay through computer speakers. All right.
All good. No more clicking.
All right, awesome. And hopefully I don't get too much outside noises either. And for those of you who know me, I tend to speak quickly, and there is a lot to cover. I will try to keep myself in check, but other folks can keep me in check as well. One thing, and I did want to also preface this, is that this presentation, any of the Project 10 RTRs are able to do it for you all, for your families, and it would be longer. We can always abbreviate, but it usually would be over an hour-long presentation. So you're getting little bits and pieces from what we're sharing today, but the resources are phenomenal, and we would love to be able to share the information with you guys in greater detail, elaboration. So for the quickie version of it, we wanted to talk a little bit more about self-determination skills. And let me switch to the next slide. This, again, I always feel kind of bad shortchanging self-determination and self-advocacy because it is so critical. It's so important. We even have our curriculum about it that starts in elementary school, Standing Up for Me. And there's a presentation that we have just on self-determination and self-advocacy. But in a teeny weeny nutshell for today, we just want to remind folks that self-advocacy is a core component of self-determination. So it's not something that you're able to use interchangeably. And it's being one core component, it's important to note that there are other core components that, folks should be assessing for and should be working on. And it's never too early to start working on building those self-determination skills. And you should really be trying to build those self-determination skills all the way back in elementary school. And you can see things that you can be working on with the self-awareness, even self-advocacy, you can start, at the elementary and the early ages. So definitely want to start working on that earlier than later. Never too early to start with self-determination, but it's best to start as early as you possibly can. And also getting the parents on board so that they can be doing things to help build students' self-determination skills outside of the school day as well. So some things to consider when you're talking about building self-determination skills, and there is more information inside the transition trail map, also the document benchmarks for middle school transition planning. There are additional activities. These are just a few to consider. But when you're teaching self-determination, self-advocacy, you can be looking at, just the students requesting their accommodations. Have them start requesting their accommodations in middle school. This is going to help them when they move on to high school. And then when they're in college, a lot of times we're hearing that sometimes the professors don't remember. And if they don't have those self-advocacy skills to request accommodations, they're at a disadvantage. The practice in requesting accommodations will also help them if they need to ask for accommodations, self-disclose in the work environment. So there are definitely things that you can start working on early, including elementary school, middle school, that will help them in their transition to high school and then adult life. Expressing preferences, we know that their post-secondary goals are going to have to be in place by age 16. So making sure that we're helping them to determine what they like, what they don't like, those preferences starting as early as possible. And a little bit later on, I'm going to talk more about kind of that career awareness pathway and starting even that in elementary school, so that by the time that student does reach age 16, they have a pretty good idea of what they would like to be doing for their post-secondary goals. Also, you can see third bullet, setting short-term and long-term goals, and those extracurricular activities. And, we talk about course of study, extracurricular activities are part of that. And we want to make sure that our students are involved in extracurricular activities that will help them to determine what they like, what they don't like. And once they start figuring out, this is what I want for my post-secondary goal, that is also in alignment with that. Some resources for self-determination. You can actually find all these resources on the Project 10 self-determination and self-advocacy webpage. But one of my favorites, and I know for many people, is I'm Determined. And that has information for students, for families, for professionals, all free. Lots of great videos, lesson plans. Also the Zero Center. I know a lot of districts are using their resources. Most of them are free. A few have a small charge, but most of them are free. So great resources. Definitely check out the Project 10 webpage. And wanted to move into the social emotional competence, SEC, and also executive functioning skills. And we included the image that you see there of circles of support. That's actually taken directly out of the transition trail map, the middle school transition trail map. And it's important to note about, the students with their circle of intimacy, the circle of participation, circle of exchange, how it depends on the student's circle of support, as far as even the social emotional competence and how they're practicing, who they're practicing with. And you want them to be able to expand their network. So within the trail map, you can get a little bit more information, and that would be under trail marker number 2. And a lot of times I don't hear SEC as much as I hear SEL, but just wanted to kind of go into that a little bit more, and you can get more information obviously in the trail map. But as far as building social emotional competence skills, you're really helping the students so that they can not only be successful in school, but it will help them to be successful in work, and it'll also generalize to their success in the community. And the teaching the students to gain the SEC skills is what's referred to as SEL, the social emotional learning. So that's what we tend to hear is the kind of the catchphrase, SEL, but that's how they play together. And the 5 SEC clusters are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And you can see how those 5 clusters also tie in really strongly to those core components of self-determination. So you're really working on a bunch of different areas that you'd be increasing students, the SEC, so that they can be successful not only in school but beyond. Really important. And I know so many districts that have very strong curriculums already in place and, things embedded throughout the week. And it's not just for students with disabilities, it's really beneficial to all students. So I want to make sure that we're working on that starting as early as possible. And for executive functioning skills, and I'll be the first to say I'm still working on this one, and especially with COVID and the switch to working completely virtual, there are definitely some elements there that I'm still working on myself. But executive functioning does include some things. We put a few up there, and there's actually one of your trail guides that also has a little bit of an area of need with our executive functioning skills. But following schedules and time management, and these are such important skills, these are important life skills. So being able to work on that while they're in middle school, that will help them with in high school and beyond, life beyond. But appropriate behavior, not only in the classroom, but also in community settings. Once they start getting into high school, they have a lot more community-based instruction going on. Also those work-based learning experiences in the community. So really starting to work on those skills early on, planning for homework and those short and long-term projects, so that they're not waiting until like the day before to do this project that maybe was over a month, but really helping them set that up. And also that organization. A lot of times when we think about executive functioning skills, instantaneously we think, okay, organization. But organizing tasks and remembering details, that's huge. And you can see at the bottom of the slide, the executive functioning app matrix. There are so many apps out there to help students and just individuals in general with different kinds of executive functioning skills. And so for organization, remembering, details, and these would be on their phone or, a smart device. So definitely a lot of things out there now that can help folks with increasing their executive functioning skills. And that will help them, teach them now so that they can use it when they go on to high school and then, life beyond. The career education and planning, and this is what I'm looking at the time because this is the one I told Carly, I really need more time on this one. We'll see how far we get. I'd love to provide more details and elaborate because I think it's so important. And I'll touch on some of the topics that Carly brought up earlier. But with career education and planning, it really is never too early to start. The image that you see on the left side of your screen, this is also in the transition trail map, and it kind of gives you a timeline as far as what you would be working on in elementary school. And that's more of that self-awareness, understanding who they are, and also that career awareness. Right now with COVID, there aren't many field trips that I'm aware of that are happening, but I know that there have been a lot of virtual field trips that have happened with Disability Mentoring and Awareness Month. There were field trips galore happening all over the place. And it's just continued to, abound throughout the community and even nationwide. Things that students can do to learn more about different jobs and job sites. But at elementary school, definitely get started. And I think that's also where you can start building high expectations. Sometimes students with more significant disabilities, maybe their parents aren't, talking about, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? But they should be. We want to start planting that seed of high expectations very early on. But when they're moving into middle school, they're still learning about careers for sure. But you're also going to start delving a little bit more with career exploration. And we're not going to have time to go into it, but we know with vocational rehabilitation, they have pre-employment transition services now, and that starts at age 14. We have a number of students in middle school that are going to be turning age 14. So they could be accessing some of those pre-ets, in middle school. But that's definitely where you want to start doing a little bit more of a deeper dive. And then in high school, you really want to start going in. And I wanted to mention, if you've seen some of our presentations, we have a slide sometimes embedded that asks folks, what's the greatest predictor of employment, post-school employment? And the answer is a paid job during high school. Paid work experience during high school. So hopefully we're allowing that opportunity for all our students. I think that the next greatest predictor would be, work experience in general. But yeah, you can see by the bullets on the slide that you're looking at career planning. We already know that in middle school, Carly mentioned it, it's a requirement, the career and education planning course, and they have to actually exit 8th grade with a plan. So making sure that when they hit 9th grade, you know what that plan is. That should be in alignment also with their IEP. So hopefully, you can see with school-based enterprises, we actually have a training on it. We also have a guide that has lesson plans in it. So much cool stuff that, we can be working with our students in high school, and Project 10 is also more than happy to assist with those. And then post school, once they exit, so many different opportunities. And the upcoming slide is going to give you a little bit more of a graphic regarding those opportunities. And some of you have seen this, you might have seen a previous version of it. I love the graphic to the left. I think it's so cool for multiple reasons. One is that you can see these different options. So these different, post-school options. And some of our students are actually accessing some of these options as, through dual enrollment while they're still in school. But the neat thing is that the arrows go both ways. So they're accessing it, but they could be getting back on that lifelong career pathway. Maybe our students are going to start in the Florida college system, and then they decide, that's not really what I want. I want to go to Career and Technical Education Center. That's awesome. Get back on the highway. You can go to a CTE program. There are some folks that go to the state university system, graduate with their bachelor's degree, and then they don't actually like the job that they're in with their 4-year degree. And they decide, you know what? I think I'm going to do the apprenticeship program that someone had recommended back in high school. So you can get on and off. There's lots of, flexibility. And I think it's a neat way of looking at the different options. And it's a neat way that you can bring it up with your families and your students as well, as you're discussing what are they going to do after high school. And the time that you're going to start talking about it is actually in middle school. You don't want to wait until the very end of high school. And, Carly had brought up some of the things you have to be thinking about in middle school before high school. And that includes all these awesome, magnet programs, career academies. That's one of the bullets on the slide. A lot of those you're applying in spring of 8th grade. And for many of those programs, you do have to prepare in advance. So you don't want to wait until 9th grade to start looking at this graphic. And if they haven't, started looking at post-secondary goals yet, you don't want to wait until they're in high school either. You want to start talking about what they plan to do, their interest, all those good things, so that they can take advantage of some of these opportunities available to them. And we hear, time and time again from families, from students, oh, if only I had known. And they might be in their sophomore year now in high school and say, oh, if only I had known about that particular program. Some of the programs are through a cohort. And the only way you can get in after 9th grade is if somebody else moves away, drops out, whatever. That space is theirs for the whole time period. So it's really important to start in middle school for that planning in high school. So important. But other things that you can find in the transition trail map, we don't have time to go over them today, but the graduation pathways, and it is in the trail map. That Project 10 has multiple resources regarding different diploma options. So it's important to discuss it in middle school as well, so families are aware. And I did want to put one plug. I know that there are some school districts that are actually starting to talk about like the 18 credit Excel option with 8th graders who are over age for grade. They're talking about that. They're talking about the academic and employment-based option, or academic and the standard diploma via academic and employment requirements. They're looking at that already and planning that path for some of our students. So really start talking early on. The diploma designations, that there are 2. They're not diplomas. They are just designations on top of the standard diploma, career and professional education, the digital tool certificates, and also industry certifications. And then the digital tool certificates, you can be earning those in middle school. And so they should be taking advantage of it if they can. Mentioned about CTE, the transition trail map does have information about CTE, including the 17 career clusters. But on our website, we have so much more information. We have 2 topical briefs regarding career and technical education. So there's definitely a wealth of information out there, and it's such a wonderful opportunity for many of our students. And some families might not be aware of it. So that might not be something that they've been talking about with their students. So want to definitely make sure that at least they're aware. Extended transition programs, it's really more of an awareness, letting them know that they exist. You can bring up deferral. Best practice is talking about deferral freshman year, but you can let folks know even in middle school, because that's kind of that long-term trajectory of what they're going to be doing. And then agency linkages, which, that in of itself, we need at least an hour to talk about, but so important. And it's important to start talking about it, in middle school as well. And like I mentioned with VR and their pre-employment transition services, that starts at age 14. So I know that at exhibitor fairs, or if I ever have the opportunity to talk to families with students in middle school, I let them know pre-ETS, age 14, if they're age 13, start researching, know where your VR office is located or who to contact at the school so they can help you with that application process. And also if they have the Medicaid waiver, what supports and services are they able to access through that. And transitioning from middle school to high school. So Carly talked a lot about the transition from elementary to middle, and also wonderful things that should be happening during middle school to help support that transition. And then when you're actually ready for that transition into high school, these are some things to consider. So similar to the transition from elementary to middle, you also would want to request and invite a representative from the student's future high school to participate in their IEP meeting. So hopefully, I mean, things are a little different now, but however that participation is going to happen, that it's really important. And also identifying a point of contact at the high school so that student knows if things are going awry or I really need to talk to somebody, who is that one person, that I can go to. And there might be a few, but at least one that they know where they're located, how to get in touch with them. Also making sure that students and families attend any events relating to transitioning to high school, orientations, open houses, all that good stuff. And then also high schools have, their websites, many of them have great, social media things going on. So they can check that out, and also scheduling a visit to the high school, either, after school hours or over the summer. But it's often helpful to, for the students to feel more comfortable with that transition if they can see it. Then they can kind of get a feel of how the high school is set up. And for the ABCs, this is really, and I know as soon as people see ABCs, like, yep, early warning system, but it's just something to consider. And you can see at the bottom of the slide, we have that a reminder how much families have, their impact, the positive impact on these three areas. So attendance, and these are the three areas for early warning system we want to be, keeping a pulse on. And for attendance, it's tardies, skip classes, missed days of school. You're looking for patterns. You're looking all the way back in elementary school, because that pattern starting in elementary school, if you can, nip it in the bud, that will be something hopefully that will help them to set them on a better trajectory as far as attendance goes later on. And sometimes the families might even need a little bit of assistance. It could be related to transportation challenges they're experiencing, but definitely checking out, their attendance, keeping a pulse on it, trying to intervene as early on as possible. Behavior, and that could be any type of disciplinary action, detentions, in school or out of school suspensions. And there are also other discretionary projects that can assist with behavior. And there are things that hopefully the families might be able to assist with in regards to behavior as well. And then course performance, again, it goes back to early warning system, looking at where they are with their courses, any course failures, and keeping a pulse on their the results of the statewide testing assessments. The graphic on the left is actually from the transition trail map. We wanted to keep it in there before we close, but it's just, helpful reminder. And even though this was geared towards families, a lot of this information is definitely appropriate for anyone who's supporting our students. And I love the final one. You are a superhero. It's so important for those, anyone who participated in the opening session, yesterday. I think we're going to need to have, bumper stickers, you are the Georgia, or be a Georgia, or I am a Georgia. But how important and impactful you are to our students. And so really, really important to just acknowledge that and be aware of it. And when we talk about high expectations, you're helping promote that, with the students themselves and also their families. So in closing, before we open it up for questions, just a reminder that the purpose of secondary transition for students with disabilities, we're preparing them for the future that they envision, that they want. We're helping prepare them for their post-secondary goals. We want them to be successful adults, have meaningful, adult lives, and, making positive contributions to their community. We want them to have a career that they love, that they, are motivated to wake up and participate in every day, and really live as independently as possible and be an active part of their community. And last bullet, never too early. Can't stress it enough. I probably sound like a, scratch record, but yeah, really, as you can start transition planning in elementary school, all the better, and getting parents involved, from the beginning as well. It definitely helps in high school. And I think that that's one thing we also hear as we go around. We sometimes participate in the on-site monitoring, and what we often hear is that from high schools that, they're talking about how the students are coming to them from middle school. So preparing them as much as possible in middle school for that high school transition is really helping. It's helping everyone, but the person who benefits the most is the student. So we want to make sure that we really are helping with those the transition planning. We have some additional resources on the slide, and APD, I mentioned them, Agency for Persons with Disabilities. If that student does have a Medicaid waiver support corner, make sure that they are involved in the transition planning process. Florida Developmental Disabilities Council has lots of wonderful publications as well. VR is there. They do have a great flyer for pre-employment transition services. It's also available in Spanish. NCWD Youth has great resources as well. And there is a secondary transition online module. It's being updated, but you can still access the previous version. Some references. We do have an evaluation, and we're going to open up for questions. I think Carly is going to be putting the link for the evaluation in the chat box.
Yes, I will. Give me one second.
Okay, and I'm going to put our contact information for a moment, and then our final slide. We have a series of final slides. For the final slide, I'm going to give you the contact information for all of your regional transition representatives. And like I mentioned, this is so abbreviated. We took out some slides, and and a lot of the things that we talk about, we ideally would like to elaborate a lot more than we did today, but we wanted to leave time also for questions from you guys. So
good job, Lisa. Look at you.
Time-wise, yeah. Thank you all so much for participating. We'll leave this up and open it up for questions.
Yeah, I was slowly answering some questions in the chat box as they came up. So one of them specifically was about pre-ETS in middle school, and could that happen for students with IEPs and 504s? And so I answered in the chat box that yes, pre-ETS can start as early as age 14 for those that are potentially eligible with a 504 or an IEP. And then we were just kind of having that dialogue back and forth that you don't really see it much in those lower levels or lower than high school, but it is available starting at age 14, and you very well could have a middle schooler at age 14. So
yeah, and for some of the students that are over age for grade in middle school, because you definitely also you have, and throughout the state, some students in middle school who are age 16 and already have their post-secondary goals in place, but at age 14, and if they are still in middle school and they're on track, they might just want to start with the self-determination. They can start with that. Well, the cool thing with pre-ETS is that they have the 5 areas, but you don't have to do all 5 areas. You can do one area. Maybe you want to skip a couple years and then do a couple more areas. You can do some areas more than once. So yeah, you definitely have flexibility in there.
So again, the link to the Project 10 eval is in the chat box. I know that you have an evaluation in your Event Mobi app for our session that I think is like clicking number of stars, and hopefully you'll give us 5 stars or 10 stars or whatever it is. But we also have a separate evaluation that we need for our project. So the link is in the chat box. It won't take you very long to fill it out, I promise. And Lisa and I would greatly appreciate it if you would take the time to complete that eval form.
Thank you. Are there questions?
I think Carly got all of them that were in the chat. The only other question was about the presentation being available. And I mentioned that the resources are available on Event Mobi underneath the Zoom link where you guys were able to join.
And Carly mentioned it in the beginning, but for the trail map, there is a separate, the resources and references section. So that is a great resource in and of itself. So if you pick up the trail map and you're kind of going that, well, it's not really referencing very much, that other document is pages and pages long with different resources and references. And the benchmarks for middle school transition planning, that also has different activities. It also has a resource bank to the side. It's grouped into different sections, and it has guiding questions. So different things also that students and families and transition planning teams can be working on.
And as Lisa said, this training is available. You can contact your Project 10 regional transition representative, and they can do the training for you. Like Lisa said, probably a little over an hour. So because a lot of the slides where you just saw like a graphic and a title slide and a graphic, the full training does go more in depth with all of those topics. We were just, for the interest of time, trying to hit the highlights.
And if there are any topics, I mean, you can put it in the chat box or you can put on your evaluation. If there are certain things that you feel are like essential that, you know, I'm really grateful that we, you know, did develop the middle school resources. It's been something that has been requested across the state. So we're like, yes, you know, we have it now. But if there are certain things, you know, in our training or when we are talking to families that you feel, you know, families and other middle school personnel that you feel like, yeah, definitely include this, by all means, you know, put that on your eval. It might be in it. It could be on the slides that we had to take out. But but we want to try to you know, meet the needs.
So we hope everybody's enjoying the conference and continues to enjoy the conference. We've got one more breakout session today, and then we've got a couple sessions tomorrow in our closing keynote with our bureau chief. So I hope everybody's enjoying the conference and continues to. And please let anybody member of the Florida DCDT board know if you have any questions, problems. We are here to help.
And on behalf of Florida DCDT, thank you, Carly and Lisa, for presenting for us.
Thank you so
much. Great
much.
Information.
Thank you, Cheney.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording.